time when you will restore the kingdom to Israel?" He replied, "It is not for you to know the times or periods that the Father has set upon his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witness in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria to the ends of the earth." This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. As you notice on our altar, we have this globe, and it represents actually Methodism in some sense, because Methodism is a worldwide institution or church. But today, we are going to talk about our church. Right there. And so I want to invite Claudia and Lisa to come forward and have a seat in the hot seat. Lisa, you can take that mic right there from... This one's yours, yep. So, for those of you that are kind of new to Methodism, every year we have something called an annual conference, and it's part of the connectionalism, probably the DNA of the Methodist Church, and we might hear it a little bit as Claudia shares about how this church was formed. So we get together and awards are given, votes are taken, appointments are made, and Lisa and I went, was it 2 weeks ago? A week and a half ago. So we're going to begin with Lisa, and we're going to start with kind of like how our conference works and how that connects to this local church. So can you give us a sense of annual conference and what you experienced there, what was hopeful?
So you already, is this currently working?
Yeah,
okay. You already kind of said what happens. So for me, one of the best parts of annual conference are the worship services, and I always really get a lot out of them. And
you need to hold the mic.
Many times I will come back and try to recreate some of the activity that happened at those worship services. So we take votes on things, and most of those action items and requests have to do with are in alignment with Methodist social principles. So some of those actions this time included full inclusion in the church body and leadership for LGBTQ people, which have already been passed at the national level or are in process, but are specifically lifted up within our conference. There were votes taken to stand against dehumanization of individuals of any stripe that are facing dehumanization actions or words. Also, there was some conversation. Most of the things that get passed aren't talked about because they have already gone through a process where they have been unanimously put on a consent, or nearly unanimously, they've been put on a consent calendar. So in parliamentary procedure, that means you don't talk about them. One item that was lifted from that consent calendar was a motion to oppose the death penalty in Idaho. So there's an individual that's facing a death sentence currently, and that item means that they want us to talk about the death penalty in the churches and oppose the specific in Idaho, but also reminded me that Oregon also has the death penalty. We just haven't used it for quite some time. What was surprising? One of the things that was surprising We also celebrated the establishment of a new church in the Portland area that's a Tongan church. And the minister of that church was one of the speakers at one of the worship services. And his choir from his church led the intro to a number of the plenary sessions. And what surprised me the most about that choir was that their music was very orchestral and classical in nature and very powerful and lovely. But it was surprising, and it was also in Tongan, so I don't know what they said, but I'm sure they said wonderful things.
Okay. What are some key things that our conference is working on right now in terms of justice work or supporting local churches?
So I brought a handout that we got from the Circle of Indigenous Ministries. So for a decade, we are going to be in a process of, let's see, I'm going to have to get the right words because they're in here. We are going to share truth, repair, consider self-determination and indigenous leadership. So the priority at this conference was to listen to those who have gone on a journey of discovering the truth of their past and the past of the Methodist Church in our area. And that included recognizing that Jason Lee, who was the first missionary who came to the West, was highly implicated in efforts to take away the identities and determination of the Native Americans that were in the region, built Indian schools, and was actually a very big failure as a missionary. But he was very effective at getting legislation passed so that the Oregon Territory would be settled and claimed by white men. So there were individuals that spoke about their history connected to being beneficiaries of the Homestead Act. And this is all in order to make sure that we know where we came from and what our roles have been in the past so that we can move forward. And they are resourcing individuals to help congregations or individuals who are faced with spiritual questioning or crises associated with that past to move out of that, but also to give the indigenous people their self-determination and their path forward, raising up leaders in indigenous communities so that they can lead their communities spiritually connected to Christianity. And that kind of leads to like our past as a church, and made me think about the ancestors that I have that came over on the Oregon Trail or came and settled in the late 1800s. The things that I might be proud about, like having a settler and a pioneer and an entrepreneurial spirit, may have also made somebody else lose what they had.
Okay, so let's talk about the One Matters Award that we received as a church, and also what we received from the trustees.
Yeah, so we came home with money and recognition this year. So this is pretty exciting. So the One Matters Award was given to 2 churches, and this award is related to having baptisms in your church. And the baptism that we recognized was
Frank.
Frank's baptism. And that Frank got so much out of his baptism and the support that the church gave him in getting him to church when he was able to come. But it also recognized the work that we are doing as a church and in the community, and the Monday night dinners and the Soul Cafe and all that goes into having a thriving congregation.
Mm-hmm.
And it will come with some sort of monetary award. We're not sure what that amount, I'm not sure what that amount will be yet. Might be $500. We don't know for sure, but it's an award that's given by the United Methodist Church in general, as opposed to just our conference. The other award that we got was from the trustees, and it's a $10,000 grant for the addition to the place. So that is pretty exciting.
And in particular for our solar addition, correct?
Yes, in particular for the solar edition. Thank you.
Okay. So here's the last question. What are the signs of new life that you see in the Methodist Church right now?
So this one's kind of hard in some ways. Beth doesn't ask the easy questions. So I was thinking about who was ordained and who is on that path to ordination. So that service is always pretty inspiring if we have new people coming into the ministry. And the new person who was ordained this year is a lesbian woman, and she was well supported by the congregation and the folks that came with her. But the others that are on that path to ordination were all Korean. And so part of the service was in Korean, and I think that speaks to the diversity of the church and who's in it and who we may see in our pulpit someday.
Okay, great. Okay, now it's your turn, Claudia.
Turn my mic on.
Yes, turn your mic on. Take us back to 1907, Claudia. What was Joseph like then, and how did this church get started?
Well, Joseph, at the turn of the century, had a population of 800 people. There were 2 telephone lines. There was a water system that they were in the process of upgrading from an open ditch to a pipe line. There was an electric plant. There were 2 stage lines. The streets were not paved yet, but Main Street was wide enough to turn a wagon around without backing up. It had been laid out by the man who owned the stage line, and he wanted to be able to turn his rigs around without having to back up. The businesses in town, we had 3 mercantiles. There was a harness and saddle shop. There were 3 millineries. Barnard's Drug, the livery stable, a gentleman who was a barber and he also took pictures, another barber who also repaired shoes. There were 2 meat markets and one conveyance of tombstones. You could buy tombstones on Main Street. There were 2 real estate and insurance agencies. There was an attorney. There was a contractor. There was a dentist and 4 physicians. There was the Hotel Mitchell and a boarding house, which was run by my great-grandmother, Kernan. But wait, there's more. I have to turn the page. There were flour mills and sawmills and a brickyard and a kiln.
Okay, so that's kind of what this little town looked like. How did this church get started?
There wasn't much for churches. There were 2. And the Methodist Church was supported by one of 2 circuits. There was the Alder Circuit and the Wallowa Circuit. And the 2 gentlemen who came by every so often, Mr. Dennison and Mr. Zellers, served this area for 2 years, from 1889 to 1891.
Okay, so that's why there's a horse on that,
That's right.
because they were circuit riders. So they would go from little outpost to little outpost. And when they would come into your little place, they would marry, they would bury, they would baptize, communion, one-stop shop kind of pastoring that would happen. And we were a part of a circuit.
Actually, 2 different circuits.
Okay, 2 different circuits.
Our first resident pastor was appointed in 1891, Reverend Fowler. He came and discovered that there was no building and no pastor, no parsonage. And the congregation met in the back room of the bank, which is now the Nez Perce room in the museum. In 1892, they bought 2 lots, and they moved the schoolhouse, which had been outgrown. They moved the schoolhouse onto these 2 lots and got a bell, and they were in business. And in 1904, there were 66 members.
Wow.
Right here. Yeah, we're sitting on them.
Do I need to ask you another
I don't know,
question?
maybe.
Okay. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about the circuit riders and what role they played in shaping this community.
Well, just that they kept the folks together. I mean, they were on their own, except for when the circuit riders came through, and that was the role. That was what they did. They brought the gospel and kept bringing it.
Yeah, I got this book called Sacred Capital, Methodism and Settler Colonialism. And it's really fascinating. I'm just going to read 2 sentences here. American Methodism's growth was one of the great developments of the early American Republic. What began as an English sect with a few small American outposts in the 1760s was by 1830 the new nation's largest religious organization. Methodism's influence came from its organizational power. After the American Revolution, Methodism swelled in numbers as it stretched over great distances, following the contours of the U.S. settler explosion. And so the role really, one of the key roles of the circuit riders was, how do you get information from other settler colonies? It was the circuit riders that brought that information. They would bring goods. They would be a part of the trade. So if you were in one of these settler outposts, you didn't feel so alone because you knew what was happening in these other areas. And that began this word that we claim as Methodists, which is called connectionalism. The circuit riders connected us with other communities.
Are we moving on?
Oh, yes, let's move on. Sorry. Are there any stories or details from the early days of this church that speak to us today and what we're becoming?
Reverend Howarth arrived in the community and it discovered that he was the only ordained clergy in the whole Upper Valley. So he held 2 services a day on Sundays, and then did all the Marian and burying and baptizing and all that for everybody. When the Episcopal bishop would show up every so often, and Reverend Howarth would always ask him to preach, and so that swelled the congregation, although at 66 or more, that little building was pretty full most of the time. They decided that it was time to have a revival, and they got in a well-known singer, and so Reverend Howarth and this singer held this revival, took a couple of weeks, and doubled the congregation. And so then they really did have to have a new building. They polled themselves to see how much money they could get together, and they counted on the Women's Society as well as everybody else. They discovered that they were going to be short, and so the board made a list of all the businessmen in the community and all the sheep ranchers and all the cattle ranchers, and they went and visited with them individually and raised enough money to go ahead with the church. They figured that they could get it done for $15,000. And having done that, then the whole community helped to build it, to build this building. I remember Uncle Malcolm, when it was time, he was concerned about the windows, and what he did was he made a list, and he went to every businessman and as many ranchers as he could reach out to subscribe to having the windows restored. The building was dedicated in 1910. 1910 and through the 1920s was a big and busy time for Joseph. It was a happening place. But by the 1930s, then it suffered the same way everybody else did in the country. Some days there were 3 people in Sunday school, and they were determined that the building was not going to be closed. There were going to be open doors on Sunday. There were months, years even, when there was no clergy to serve this church. And they held Sunday school anyway and just did what they could. They did temporary repairs on the building. The mortar was falling away and the roof needed new shingles, and one of the pastors, who was 70 at the time, climbed up on the roof to help put the shingles on so that we could preserve the inside of the church. They did the best they could, and the women were part of that. The women undertook to maintain the parsonage. They did the cleaning at the church. They supported however they could. There's one little note that said the Women's Society had put on a dinner for the teachers at 40 cents a plate, and they were able to contribute $17 to the budget with that. So they did what they had to do. Yeah, and so do we. We have gone months and perhaps years without a pastor in the recent past. Mm-hmm. And we did what we had to do. Sometimes we filled the pulpit taking turns on our own, and sometimes they get somebody in for 6 months. We had an intern for a while. Yeah, the community continues.
I think another piece from that story that speaks deeply to me is that it wasn't just the people in the church that contributed to the building of the church. It was the entire community.
Yes.
And I feel that same kind of grace and goodness with our community dinners, that it's not just us, but it's the entire community supporting. And I think that's a part of our DNA that we need to pay attention to and know that that grace is still there.
Yes.
Yeah. Do I have another question? Okay.
Yes, you do.
If those early church members could see us today, what do you think they'd recognize and what might surprise them the most?
Well, they'd recognize the building. And I suspect that they would recognize the spirit of the people as well. As for being surprised, well, the place is certainly, and its outreach in the community.
Okay. Any questions we have for the historian that you're curious about? Yes.
Oh, well, that was kind of up to them. I don't know. Maybe, yeah, it could be that.
At one point, we were a part of the circuit that included Wallowa and Flora and Imnaha. So that's quite a distance
It could be once a month. When Reverend White was here, he served, well, Enterprise was part of it.
Enterprise.
And after the camp got going, then the pastor here was the superintendent at the camp as well. So it was, I think it was a 5-point charge for Reverend White.
Another piece of the history that I find fascinating is when this church was built, it's noted that membership was 35. And we have an average worship attendance of about 38 right now. So we're doing good. And that probably this church is a church that is always, there's going to be a circuit riding element to the pastor having not just one church, but other jobs in order to support, to be here. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there was a yoked relationship between the Joseph Methodist Church and the Wallowa Methodist Church.
For years, yes. Yeah.
Did that begin?
Oh, well, that,
That would have been circuit riding. where
yes,
that
well, it would have been
initial
a
connection-
circuit. Yes, but it was just Joseph and Wallowa by that point.
That was when Kay was here.
Well, it was way
Before then?
long
Oh,
before her.
okay.
Reverend Secord was at Wallowa, and before him too, I think.
So that was at least in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, that. Yeah, we were together for
Until
years.
maybe 2010-ish.
Does anybody know what the current relationship is or status is with that building, at least, and the tribe?
The building belongs to the tribe. That's all I know. Is that
I understand that it will be dismantled shortly.
I forgot you know things like that.
Was that a Methodist church or did the Presbyterian, was that the other church that's there that's been remodeled or?
I think that's a private home, isn't it?
Oh, it is now, but wasn't it a Presbyterian?
It was Christian, I think.
Yeah, I don't. Presbyterians only had a presence in Lostine, that as far as I know.
My understanding was that the Presbyterians and Joseph also joined the Methodists at the time that the church was built. That was the story that my father handed down to me, that his father was a Presbyterian and joined with the Methodists.
Okay, well, now all of you know Claudia, the historian. You can come and ask her questions. Lisa, anything about current Methodism? Please ask her and not me. Okay? She knows more than I do. Okay, thank you so much. This was wonderful. As we prepare for a time of prayer, let's sing together, Come and Find the Quiet Center. It's in the Faith We Sing, number 2128.